The first heat had broken, but the desert kept its breath close, warm as a held hand. The wind came thin off the mesas and skimmed the rust grass in the lower pastures, not enough to make a sound, only enough to show Sorrel march where the tufted grama still clung to life in cautious green. She drew the back of her wrist across her brow and tasted salt. The day had been all fence wire and trough mud, and the last of the feed sacks stood like folded prayers by the barn door. She told herself there were two kinds of silence on a ranch, the good quiet of animals bedded and tools hung, and the other kind, the sifting hush of loss, when the water level fell and the windmill ticked without conviction. Today was the second kind. Sorrel knew it the way she knew the slow ache in her wrists, the split in her lower lip, the weight in her chest that came every time she counted what was left and found less. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The horse in the last paddock lifted his head at her step. Comet, iron gray with a bit of white along the nose like a thumbprint, watched without moving, the way an old friend watches when you are trying to break a hard truth gently. He had been born here from a mare that died the next winter, and Sorrel had broken him herself in a corral full of dust so thick it turned the sunlight to flour. He was not fast anymore. That suited the kind of days they were having. "Don't look at me like that," she said, half smiling. "It came to this a long time ago." The sound came suddenly, a far note, quick and brutal as a dropped bead, like a stone striking slate in the gulch that cut the west pasture in two. Sorrel turned. She listened once with the surface of her hearing and again with the deeper sense that born ranchers had, the one that told them without thinking if a rattler was under the saltbush or a wire had given way. Another sound followed, low, hurried voices in a language that moved like water over rock. Then the clatter she recognized, hoof on stone, but light, almost apologetic. Sorrel took the shotgun down from the nail by the tackroom door and crossed the yard at a measured pace. There was dust hanging at the lip of the arroyo like a thought someone meant to speak and did not. Beyond it, the broken cottonwood at the ford stood black against the evening. They came clear around the bend like quail slipping from brush, two girls on a clay-red pony with a rag-twisted halter, one in front, one behind, both so light the animal looked relieved. Their black hair had caught the day's wind and wove around their faces. The elder, Sorrel guessed late teens, held to the pony's mane with her left hand and cradled something wrapped in doeskin in her right. The younger sat backward, watching their trail with eyes that did not blink. They saw the barrel of Sorrel's gun and the elder raised her palm. "We come for water," she said in careful English, and the care in it told Sorrel she knew more than she pretended. "Our pony is thirsty." "This isn't a well for strangers," Sorrel answered, though it was and always had been, not saloon whiskey, not the town pump, but the shallow spring behind her barn that she kept clean with a screen and sweet with cedar chips. People had come to it unasked since before she was born. You could not own water that rose of its own will. You could only borrow its favor. The girl's mouth tightened, the way mouths do when pride and need shove at each other in the same small space. "Not strangers," she said. "Neighbors. We are Nez." She spoke the name like a step set down firmly. "I am Dolly. This is my sister, Najoni." The younger turned so she faced forward again, her chin lifting a fraction. The movement had a careful dignity Sorrel recognized, the kind you learn young when adults expect you to apologize for your own existence. "We don't beg," Dolly added. "We trade." "What do you trade for water in a year like this?" Sorrel asked, keeping her voice mild. She lowered the shotgun, but did not put it away. "I have troughs enough for a pony and two girls. The price is that you let me look at what's wrapped in your hands before we talk about anything else." Dolly hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the barn door, to the windmill's bony arm ticking its old rhythm, to the horse in the last paddock who had put his nose over the fence and was watching as if he could understand English and dine both. She unwrapped the doeskin. Inside lay a bundle of hair darker than raven's wings and the length of a forearm, carefully bound, oiled, tied with a thin strip of blue cloth. "Offering," Dolly said quietly. "For safe passage. For help. For courage." The last word cost her. "We cut it ourselves." Sorrel felt the situation tilt under her boots, as if a plank had shifted on a footbridge and shown her the rush underfoot. Haircut is vow and medicine both, she knew. It is grief and promise, leaving and beginning. These girls had broken something sacred to carry it to the next sacred thing they needed. What are you crossing? Sorrel asked. And what is chasing you? Dolly's throat moved as she swallowed. Riders, she said. From the east. They came to the trading post with papers and a lawman with a tin star. They said our father owed cattle to a white man near Canyon Red, said the papers proved it. Our father said the paper was a lie. They took our uncle instead. We went to the trader after dark, but he had sold out his goats and said, I am sorry, girls, and locked the door. And then? We ran, Dolly said simply. We ran to warn our father, to tell him the papers were wrong, to bring him to get our uncle back. The men followed. We need a fresh horse. We will return it. We are Nez. Sorrel breathed in, sharp. Paper with a white man's name could move a fence line a mile in an afternoon. Paper did not care if a canyon was where it had been since the world stood up and shook off its sleep. Sorrel knew the name of one man out near Canyon Red who liked paper more than he liked truth, Bracken Howell, who had bought land the way a winter buys fruit, cheap and rough and not for taste. Bracken had tried to buy Sorrel's lower pasture with a letter written by a clerk 2 territories away. She had fed the letter to her stove and the stove had burned hotter than any day in March. Let the pony drink, Sorrel said, and set the shotgun against the fence. You, too. They walked together toward the troughs while dusk took the color from everything except the sky. The pony drank greedily, head bobbing, flank shivering. Dolly cupped water to Najoni with a worn tin dipper. The younger drank like someone who'd been taught not to show relief. You've cut it close, Sorrel said. They will ride hard until full dark, sleep a little, and come again just before dawn. That's how men with paper think, that the day belongs to them and night is a pause when they let the world rest. Dolly's mouth quirked. You speak like our aunt. She says the world rests when it wants and walks when it wants, and the only use for a man with paper is to wedge a table leg with it. She sounds sensible. She is, Dolly said, and a small shadow crossed her face that told Sorrel the aunt was either dead or far away. What is hidden in the next bend past my fence, Dolly Nez? Sorrel asked. New riders do not know the folds of this ground. Your father doesn't send daughters alone unless the path takes a shape only small feet can fit. Dolly considered the question as if it were a knife she meant to examine both edges of. A washout, she said at last. The arroyo climbs and then breaks where last year's flood ran hard. A man can take a horse through if he walks it careful. 2 men riding shoulder to shoulder will go down together, and the rock won't care who is on top and who is under. Sorrel nodded. You've scouted. We have lived, Dolly corrected gently. Scouting is what men call it when they get paid for it. Sorrel looked at Comet again. The old gelding had not taken his eyes from her. He was sound if not swift, sure-footed in dry country, kind of heart, and too big to hide behind a juniper. He was also the last horse she owned outright, the last breath of a herd that had once moved like weather across these paddocks. If he went with these girls, Sorrel would have no horse tomorrow. No horse meant no easy repair, no quick run to town for salt or parts, no rounding strays back from the basalt spill that ate calves like a slow, patient cat. No horse meant she was no rancher in any way the world would recognize. No horse meant she was still Sorrel March. It meant she could still decide what kind of woman she was. You can't outrun men with a pony like that, she said quietly, more to herself than to them. You can outwalk them in broken country if you choose your stones and your shadows. But to take your uncle back, you need to arrive before the paper does more harm than iron. Dolly stayed steady, but Najoni turned her face towards Sorrel fully for the first time. There was a fierce impatience in her that made Sorrel think of spring water running under ice. We know, the younger said. We are not children. We came to trade. Not for water. For a horse. What do you offer for a horse? Hair, Dolly said, glancing down at the bundle again. And our word. And, she swallowed, and our father's protection for you and your land when he comes. He is hasty and Nez. People listen when he speaks. He is your father, Sorrel said. He will protect you first. Always, Dolly agreed. If we survive to be protected. There was a small space where silence stood and waited politely, as if it would leave whenever they were ready to let it go. Sorrel turned away and set the dipper back on the nail. Her hands moved without her permission to the old protocol: see to the water, see to the animal, see to the visitors. She opened the oat bin and measured a scoop with an economy she'd learned the hard way: half for the pony, a handful each for the girls. She cut 3 slices of bread from the end of a loaf and spread each with a thin layer of the apple butter she made last autumn when she still believed the winter would be gentle. When she looked up, Dolly was watching her with a wariness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with being tired of generosity that came with hooks. Take the bread, Sorrel said. It does not make you owe me. If you like, we'll call it payment for the sight of the hair. It is very fine hair. Najoni took hers with both hands the way a child accepts a ceremonial thing. Dolly took hers like a business partner. Their eyes softened, almost in unison, as they ate. You're alone, Dolly observed. Where are your people? Some buried on the hill, Sorrel said. Some fell out with me long ago. Some live in town and talk about my choices over coffee. It makes them feel better about their trouble to measure mine. Dolly considered that and then nodded. We have some like that, too. I imagine everyone does. Sorrel reached for Comet's halter. Her hands shook a little. I have the horse you need, she said. He is not fast, but he does not miss a rock. He is strong as the will to keep walking. Dolly's eyes widened. Najoni's bread paused halfway to her mouth. You will trade? Sorrel felt something like laughter rise and pass in her chest, not amusement, exactly, but the sharp release that comes when you have finally said the thing you were forcing yourself not to say. Not trade, she answered. Give. Dolly looked at the wrapped hair in her hands, at the old gray horse whose ears had come forward to listen, at the woman with the weathered face who had chosen the shape of her day before dawn even thought about turning the sky. We cannot take a gift like that, she said. We are Nez. Then take it as a loan, Sorrel said. A loan that turns into a gift if you are not able to return it. If you do return him, you can bring a story to pay the interest. Najoni's mouth quirked upward. Stories are expensive now, she said. We will bring 2. And I'll be rich, Sorrel returned. She opened the gate and led Comet out. The old horse came willingly, as if he had been waiting his whole life to be asked to do this particular thing. Dolly set the hair bundle carefully on the fence post and put her hand on Comet's cheek, just above the soft hollow where bones shaped a cup for breath. She did not kiss him, Sorrel marked that with respect. Kisses are for romance or grief. This was obligation, prayer, partnership, work older than words. A sound rose then from the east, low and full of metal. Sorrel stiffened. She had lived long enough to separate hoof thunder from other thunder. This was the first kind, and it was well shod. She lifted her head like a deer and counted beneath her breath. 3. No, 4. One with a lighter cadence, a quick horse, or a nervous rider. We don't have time to argue about pride and gifts, Sorrel said, too quietly to be scolding. Mount up. Dolly swung onto Comet with the grace of someone who has spent a childhood on plain-backed horses. Najoni got the pony, lighter and restless. Sorrel tightened Comet's cinch and slapped his shoulder with rueful affection. Do not make me a liar, she whispered to his ear. Carry them like you carried me when I did not know what mattered. Dolly looked down at her. You are not coming? I will slow you, Sorrel said. And there is a little work here left to do. She smiled small and fierce. I am not much for running. I like to meet problems on my feet. Najoni, already turning the pony toward the arroyo's shadow, threw Sorrel a quick, bright look that landed like a blessing. Dolly opened her mouth as if to speak and then shut it, harder. We will come back, she said. I will lay my face on your horse's neck again. I will speak your name to my father, Hasty and Nez. Speak it softly, Sorrel said, or the wind will carry it to the wrong ears. They went into the dusk, Comet steady, the pony nimble, the girl's outline shrinking toward the cut in the land where shadows made their own kind of map. Sorrel watched until the black took them. Then she picked up the hair from the fence post and carried it to the house with the careful respect she gave to her mother's Bible and her father's watch. She had time enough to set the hair by the hearth and to lay wood in the stove and strike a match. The kettle began to think about boiling. She cut lengths of sacking and dampened them and draped them over the window panes. It was not a trick for bullets. It was a trick for dust and wind and for making a house look more like itself and less like a target. By the time the hoofbeats reached her yard, she had set 2 cups at the table, placed the tin of coffee within reach, and leaned the shotgun where her hand could find it in a heartbeat. Her heart had already found its gallop. It beat double behind her ribs, a horse pounding that fenced place. For men swung off their mounts without regard for the horses' mouths. That told Sorrel most of what she needed to know. Men who hurt their own animals for convenience do not keep their promises to strangers. Evening, the tallest said, stepping onto her porch without asking. His hair was the color of rope and his eyes had the watery washed blue of men who squint because they don't like what they see. He wore law on his chest and meanness under his skin. Ma'am. Evening, Sorrel said. You'll want water for your horses. We'll see to them after, the man said. Name's Pike. Deputy out of Canyon Red. We're chasing thieves. You should hurry, then, Sorrel said, keeping her body easy in the door. Thieves like not to be kept waiting. Pike's smile was unnecessary. You're quick. You see 2 Indian girls on small stock? The way he said Indian was like the way some men say snake, as if they were proud to show the fear in it. 1 tall, 1 short. Riding a worn-out nag and something that looks like a dog with a saddle. I see many things, Sorrel said, and keep what's worth keeping. The man shifted. His boot heel creaked. He had the habit of someone who would rather push a door than knock. We got papers say their pa owes cattle to Mr. Bracken Howell. Judge's name on it and all. Judges put their names on more foolishness than editorial pages, Sorrel said. Pike studied her. Mr. Howell also said you give him trouble with paper. Mr. Howell can call a cactus a cow. Doesn't make it give milk. The deputy flicked his gaze toward the well, then back to her face. We'll have a look around. He pushed, not hard enough to shove, just hard enough to be a test. Sorrel did not move. You have a warrant with my name on it for my place? We have papers. My mother taught me to read the Bible, Sorrel said. It didn't translate papers as warrant. Now listen, Pike began, and the 2 men behind him shifted the way men do when they taste conflict and feel their teeth show. The 4th man glanced toward the corrals. Something about the way his shoulders hunched told Sorrel he had not come for work. He had come because someone like Mr. Howell had told him the day would be easy and the pay would be good, and he would be ashamed later if he lived that long. She inclined her head toward the table inside. Coffee's hot. If you can't read your papers, I can read them for you. Words are thinner than fence wire. They stretch where a hand wants them to. Pike considered, then nodded as if he were granting her a favor by stepping into her home. He took the chair with his back to the window, which told Sorrel he was used to coming in first and sitting where he wanted. The other men arranged themselves in the room the way dogs arrange around a bone someone else has already put his foot on. The paper he handed her had a geometry that reeked of town, blocks of text stacked into a wall, names mortared between numbers. It said things that were sometimes true in one place and almost never true in another. It said that Bracken Howell had sold 20 head to Hasty and Nez on a date when Sorrel knew no one with sense bought cattle. It said that Hasty and Nez owed twice the agreed price for missed payments and loss. It said the court at Canyon Red had stamped its approval across the bottom in a tidy blue arc that looked like a sunset someone sick had drawn. It says what you said it says, Sorrel told Pike. Except for the part where the cattle were ever delivered. There is no proof here of that. The court knows Howell, Pike said. The court should know the canyon and the 2 winters we just had, Sorrel returned. No man with a mind bought 20 head the fall that tank cracked. And Hasty Nez is not a man to bargain for animals he cannot walk to water. He is a man who counts feet and readies hay before he shakes a stranger's hand. She kept her voice as steady as a mare's breath. You're not chasing thieves. You're chasing daughters. Same thing, some days, one of the other men said, and Sorrel felt her heart go steady with anger. You'll want to water your horses and ride if you mean to catch them, she said. There's a washout past the next bend. Pike's gaze sharpened. You saw them. I see the land, Sorrel said. It told me what passed. She laid the paper down. You spill water on that and it will blur. You spill blood on it and it will look prettier to men who like to see red on things they can fold and put away. Pike stood. He was the kind who did not notice when he made a room smaller. He thought walls should move for him. We'll look out back. I can't stop you, Sorrel said, though she could make it cost. But if your men shoot at shadows, make sure they don't hit my windmill. The wind has precious little else to turn. They went out with a swagger that was more habit than courage. Sorrel followed without hurrying. The sky had gone indigo at the edges and the first star set its pin into the seam of evening. She watched the men check the barn, the corral, the lean-to, the pile of fence posts like a river's worth of bones. She watched the 4th man hang back, his eyes on the well. He met her gaze for one beat and looked away like a boy who'd been caught pocketing a peach pit. Ma'am, Pike said, coming back around the corner. If you interfere with the law, there are consequences. If the law interferes with truth, there are consequences, Sorrel said. They take longer. But they arrive. Pike tipped his hat as if he had won something. Tell Mr. Howell you were polite if he asks, he said. It greases the kind of wheels that roll over people who don't sign their names with flourishes. They mounted. Sorrel stepped to the trough as the deputy gathered his reins. She filled a bucket and sloshed water over the 4th man's horse's neck. The animal startled and then sighed into relief. The man looked at Sorrel, embarrassed and grateful and hindered by the man he followed. She gave him a smaller smile than she felt and stepped back as they turned toward the arroyo. She went inside when their dust had become a rumor. She bolted the door and set her back against it and let her head rest on the wood. Then she pushed off and moved because stillness is sometimes a kind of surrender. The kettle finally boiled. She poured water over grounds and watched the coffee bloom like dark moss, watched it with the same attention she gave to calves' nostrils after a hard birth, to the coil of a rope, to the crease of a sky before weather. She drank standing up. She ate nothing. The house felt both too small and too large, and all the things in it had the edged reach of familiarity in crisis. It would take the deputy an hour to reach the washout if he did not know where it was. It would take him less if someone had told him. Bracken Howell owned a map he'd bought with whiskey and promises. Sorrel imagined the men in the arroyo's bottom, Comet stepping careful, Dolly steady, Najoni's light pony setting small stones to whispering. She did not like to imagine the fall. She refused to. She fed the stove, banked the fire, and took the hair bundle again into her hands. Its weight surprised her every time she lifted it, a human measure that was not quite as heavy as a small rabbit but heavier than a swallow. Hair's weight is promise, she thought. You don't feel it until you have said yes to something that will cost you. A soft sound at the window pulled her head up, a scrape that could be branch or boot. Sorrel crossed the room without sound and put her eye to the narrow slit in the curtain. The man with the sloped shoulders stood there, halfway between the porch and the shadow of the well. He raised his hands, palms out, empty. She opened the door a crack and let him stand on the threshold of her lamplight without stepping in. You leave something? She asked. Only my sense, he said, and the self-mockery made him look briefly like someone's older brother instead of someone's hired trouble. Deputy Pike doesn't know the wash the way you do. He'll ride into it like a man approaching his own forgetting. If those girls take it light, like rabbits, they'll pass fine. If he pushes hard and doesn't see his second stirrup, he shrugged. They'll all go down, horses and men, and the rocks will keep their secret long after Howell gets his next paper stamped. What's your name? Sorrel asked. Caleb Lorne. You signed on with Howell for water money or whiskey money? Water, he said, looking ashamed for not saying family. Sorrel weighed him. Then take this. She pressed the hair into his hands. He flinched. People always do when they touch something they don't expect to carry. If you reach those girls before the deputy, give it back to them. Tell them I changed my mind and would like to cut my own hair to match, to make the loan true. Tell them I will do it when they tell me their story. If the deputy reaches you first, hand it to him and say it's an old medicine I tend for a neighbor. If he is the kind who is afraid of women's medicine, he will not touch it. Caleb held the hair like a man who had been handed his own heart and told to return it to the right person. Why trust me? Because you stayed, Sorrel said. Because you wanted to water your horse. Because you looked like a boy who knows what shame is for and doesn't like it. He gave her a lopsided nod and tucked the bundle inside his coat. You're not wrong, he said, and then he was gone, a shadow angled to a larger shadow, a boot sound folded into the night's own footfall. Time turned thick. Sorrel paced the 2 long rugs her mother had braided out of denim and grief. She checked the clock and found it lied the way clocks do in late hours. She checked the windows again and again. The moon should have risen by now, but a weather line hung low to the south, a bruise over the jagged teeth of the far mesa. When the knock came, it was not a knock. It was the sound a man makes when he runs out of arguments with himself and finds none of them worth saving. Sorrel opened the door onto Caleb's face, dust ground into the side of his cheek, a scrape across his knuckles where rock had taught skin its lesson. They took the wash too quick, he said. The deputy's second went down. Horse rolled and then righted like a miracle with too much bone in it. The deputy saw it too late and hauled back hard. The one behind ran into him and went over. Your girls, his breath caught. They were clear. The older looked back like a fool out of courage and the younger pulled her forward so hard the gray found his legs like some old saint remembering how to walk on water. Sorrel's chest loosened and then tightened again as quickly. Pike? Mad now, Caleb said. Told me to make a fire and wait there until his men could walk. I made a little one and left it behind my back. I took the hair to the older girl and told her the lie you asked me to tell. She laughed at me. She said, tell the rancher we know a gift when it comes wrapped like that. Tell her to keep her hair. I said, she's a stubborn woman. She said, so are we. Sorrel's laugh came out like a cough. Good. They'll reach the ridge before midnight, Caleb said. After that, the ground tilts toward their father like a table with a habit. If they don't break an ankle or a promise, they'll have men under them before dawn. You know what that means. Sorrel did. She knew the feel of mornings when the land holds its breath, when birds stay quiet without quite knowing why, when the sun's first edge looks at you like an eye-opening in someone who does not love you. She knew the shape of a parley and the taste of a fight you could avoid if you were willing to be broken and call it compromise. You should go, she said. If you're tied to Howell's men and the girls bring their father, your face will be in both camps' memories. That's not a good place for a man who sometimes wants to be better. Caleb's mouth pulled sideways. I came to ask you to tell me the same. It makes it easier to pretend I'm not a coward. You're not, Sorrel said. You're a man who sees 2 doors and chooses the one that doesn't close on his foot. She handed him a canteen and half the loaf. Go north along the fence line, then cut west. There's a gap in the basalt your horse will find if you let him. After that the land will forgive you. He took the things and looked like he wanted to leave something behind that was not trash. You need anything? He asked, as if you were not the one leaving. I need to sleep, Sorrel said. Which means I need to do everything else first. He bobbed a nod and went. She shut the door and leaned her forehead against the wood again. She did not move for the length of 2 long breaths. Then she moved for an hour, because that is what you do when trouble is coming and you cannot sleep, you make your hands tired. She patched the hole in the feed room that a rabbit had nibbled soft in the plank. She took her father's old rifle apart and cleaned it, the smell of oil thick as old church in the room. She wound bandage rolls and boiled the scissors and set needles in a saucer by lamplight. At the end of that hour, she took a length of twine out into the yard and tied it from the porch post to the cottonwood stump and from the stump to the pump handle, low, where a man who moved like he owned the world would not see it. She set a bucket at the edge of the kitchen step, a nothing of a trap, noise where she needed it, nothing more, because noise is information and information is time. It was past midnight when she let herself sit in the chair by the window with the rifle across her knees. The house sighed as boards do when night cools them, as if the day had been a long fever and rest had finally come into the lungs of the place. Outside, a stone owl took a vole with a thump that sounded like a fist into clay. Sorrel closed her eyes for what she told herself would be a breath and found she had taken 3 when a sound woke her, a hoof scrape not 10 yards from her porch. She was up and moving before her body had finished remembering how. The sound came again, the slow roll of iron on wood. Someone careful, then. Not Pike. Not one of his men. Men like that ride like a story they've been told about themselves. This was someone who had learned silence from others in sand. She opened the door before the knock and found herself staring into the great quiet of a face carved by wind and patience. The woman on the horse wore her hair in 2 braids bound with blue string that matched the ribbon in the hair Sorrel had carried earlier. She held a lantern shuttered to a slit, its light sought a narrow plank of brightness across Sorrel's porch and fetched a gleam off the glass bead at the woman's throat. "You are Sorrel March," the woman said. Her voice had that low contained power Sorrel had heard in canyon water before it turned itself to fall. "I am Najoni. My brother is Hasty and Nez. Our daughters came to you. You gave them a horse." Sorrel set the rifle down by the door. "I gave them a reason to forgive me if I lied about what kind of woman I am," she said. "Will they make it?" "They will," the woman said, a flick of light in her eyes that went out as quickly as it came. "One of the men in the wash will not. He belongs to the law, but the law did not teach him to keep his stirrup where the land says keep it. He is broken like a chair with one short leg now." "I'm sorry," Sorrel said, and meant it for that man and for others she had sometimes failed. "What do you need?" The woman studied her with a look that tasted of assessment and respect and the little edge of danger that comes when 2 strong people meet over a small table. "You gave our daughters water and food and a horse," she said. "You did not take their hair. You told them to bring a story back. I have come to bring the beginning of it." Sorrel felt her throat tighten stupidly. She had not expected that, to be seen in action and returned a thing better than what she had handed over. She held the door wide and stepped back. "Come in," she said. "The coffee is bitter enough to make a man honest. It will do fine for 2 women." Najoni tethered her horse to the porch post with a knot that could be loosed one-handed in a hurry and stepped into Sorrel's house like someone entering a church, not fearful, but mindful. She sat at the table. Sorrel poured. The woman drank and nodded once. "Our daughters said you speak like us," she said. "Not in words but in the way you lay them side by side. I will tell you quickly, because the night is small now. Howell has a man who marries paper to paper until it looks like a family and then calls it truth. The trader at the post helps him because Howell's silver buys flour that turns into bread that keeps the trader's sister's baby from looking like a shadow. The law knows Howell's horses better than it knows our names." "I could have told that part," Sorrel said dryly. Najoni allowed the briefest curl of her mouth. "Our brothers sent goats to the trader last winter when snow made story short. The trader wrote down the goats as Howell's gift and counted them against the cattle he says my brother owes. He used our kindness to pay Howell's debt and call it gratitude." "I see the shape of it," Sorrel said. "Do you want me to speak in town?" "Do you want to?" the woman asked, and the question was not rhetorical. It was a test of Sorrel's marrow. "I want to do what makes fewer graves," Sorrel said. "Then you will speak," the woman said. "And you will stand where we stand at dawn. Not behind us and not in front of us. Next to us. If you like to meet trouble on your feet, you will have that pleasure." Sorrel smiled without humor. I do not think pleasure means what you want it to mean. Sometimes it does, as Najoni said, and stood. My brother will be here when morning looks over the hill. He will bring 200 men. If Howell's law stands with steel instead of paper, there will be noise like rain on tin and blood like berries crushed for dye. If we stand together, there will be words first. Sorrel took a breath that felt like stepping into a cold river. She did not look at the rifle by the door. She looked at her hands, which were strong enough to carry water and pull calves and bury dead dogs with dignity. I will be next to you, she said. Tell your brother so. Tell him I'm the woman in a house with a windmill that says yes. He knows, the woman said. He sees farther than I do, but not as far sideways. It is good to have both kinds of seeing. She pulled a small pouch from her belt and set it on the table. Blue cornmeal, she said. Dust a path with it from your door to where you will stand and you will not lose your place when men start shouting. Sorrel laughed, surprising herself. I like how you think. I like that you fed my children and made the deputy drink his own spit, the woman replied. It tells me what kind of woman you are. She stepped to the door. Sleep if you can. If not, sit with your back to a wall that will hold you. When she had gone, Sorrel carried the pouch to the shelf where she kept salt and beans and the recipe card for the cornbread her mother had never managed to write without leaving something important out. She touched the cornmeal with the tip of one finger. It had the smell of morning in it, the ancient dry sweetness of grain ground with caution and song. She did not sleep. Instead, when the darkest part of night came and passed, the hour when the body knows, with or without a clock, that horses switch sides in the stall and coyotes choose whether to sing or hunt, she went outside. She dusted a line of blue cornmeal from her door to the cottonwood stump and from the stump to the pump and from the pump out to the place where the yard opened toward the pasture. The cornmeal marked a path like a river promised in the empty bed of a creek. Just before dawn, the world stilled in that particular way it does before a flock lifts or a gunshot falls. Sorrel felt it in the skin behind her ears, in the meat under her collarbone. She stood at the end of the blue line and put her hands at her sides, palms open. The air tasted of iron and sage in equal parts. They came without noise at first, as if they were the morning itself learning to move, dark shapes on dark ground, 50, then 100, then more, the hooves landing with a discipline that did not ask permission from the earth because it remembered being made out of it. The horse's breath showed gray in the new cold. The riders sat with a patience that read as power. They were not painted for war, they were clothed for travel. It made them more dangerous. War paint is a promise to the other man. Travel clothes are a promise to yourself. Hasty and Nez rode at their front. He was spare as a winter willow and held himself with the same easy, stock-straight grace. His hair was raven black with a skein of white through it like a river twisting in stone. He carried no rifle in his hands. The men behind him did, and the rifles sat easy in their arms like tools whose names you do not say aloud unless it is time to use them. On the ridge beyond, another line formed, the deputy and his men, Bracken Howell himself on a glossy bay with hate on his mouth, and a handful of town men who had found their courage where men often do, in each other's eyes. There were no women there. Sorrel felt the absence as a draft in a closed room. Hasty and Nez brought his horse forward until his shadow touched Sorrel's boots. He looked at her as if she were a creek he had heard about and was now measuring for depth with his eyes. He spoke first in Dine to the men behind him, and the words moved like beadwork, pattern inside pattern, strong strands hidden under surface. Then he shifted to English with the ease of someone who dislikes a tool but uses it well. You are Sorrel March, he said, and it felt less like a question than a naming. I am. She almost added sir and did not out of disrespect but because the word felt like a fence placed where a gate should go. You gave my daughters a horse and sent them with courage in their hands. He nodded toward her porch. You kept their hair where your fire sleeps and did not let small men touch it. You will stand here when I ride to speak? I will, Sorrel said. I haven't got anywhere else to be that matters. He regarded her for a long moment. Good, he said simply. He lifted his chin toward the ridge. When the sun shows all our faces, I will ask the men on that hill a question with my voice. If their answer is paper and bullets, I will ask them the old way. Do you want me to say anything before that? Sorrel asked. What would you say? That paper burns fast and men do not burn fast enough for my taste, she said. That water is not bought with ink. That the trader's ledger is as honest as a coyote's blessing. He let an actual smile find his face, small, reluctant, as if joy were a stone you did not skip unless the river asked you to. Say that, he said. Say it so that the sky hears you and remembers you said it. He turned his horse half a hand's breadth. And then step back next to me and keep your hands where my men can see them when the shouting begins. Some of my cousins have not slept and their trigger fingers are angry. I can honor that, Sorrel said. The sun took its first breath on the world, ripped a ribbon of orange along the serrated edge of the far mesa, and showed everybody who they were. Howell with his hat set too low like a gambler frightened of his own luck, Pike with his mouth pinched into something he wanted to be a line of principle, the town men with chins up and the particular stiffness that comes from not wanting to be the first to lower your gun, Hasty and Nez with patience like a canyon, and Sorrel March with her boots planted in blue cornmeal and her open hands at her sides and the sand lifting in small, eager dancers around her ankles. On the ridge, a rifle cocked the way a man clears his throat. Hasty and Nez moved his horse 3 paces forward, smooth as thought, and raised his palm. The 200 riders behind him shifted in the same breath, a flock of swallows turning. On the opposite ridge, Pike lifted his hand without meaning to. Howell saw and scowled and lowered it again with a jerk of his chin. Men of Canyon Red, Hasty and Nez called, and his voice carried like sound carries in a church built right, with grace and authority and an echo strapped under it. I am Hasty and Nez. Your papers say I owe cattle to Mr. Howell. Your paper lies. Your paper ate the goats I gave the trader in a month of snow and called the meal a debt. Your paper says my daughters are thieves. My daughters ride straight. So I have come with men who will not run from paper. He leaned slightly in the saddle, the way a tree leans when the river speaks. Bring me my brother, your prisoner, and bring the trader who married our goats to Howell's silver. We will speak with our voices while the sun is new. If your answer is a rifle, we will listen with our rifles. Howell's laugh came down the ridge like a bottle thrown into a dance. You don't make terms with the law out here, he called back. You kneel to it. The law kneels to water in winter, Sorrel said calmly before Pike could open his mouth. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. And men kneel to what their mothers taught them in the first house. If the first house taught them to take what isn't theirs, they kneel to theft and call it order. Pike's face changed in the way faces do when words find the soft part under armor. Howell's didn't move. Bring the prisoner, Pike said, low to Howell, not meant for the 200 men who could hear a lizard sneeze at this distance. We can show a face of good faith. Bring nothing, Howell snapped. Show nothing. They ride off or they bleed. Hasty and Nez's horse lifted his head and stamped, the sound of it was intimate and cold. The 200 shifted again in a way that made Howell's bay dance under him. Sorrel felt each change in her own body as if the ground had put a wire through her boots and around her bones. I've asked you with my voice, Hasty and Nez said. Do you wish to answer with voices or with? A shot cracked, sharp as the world's most stupid answer. The bullet struck the cottonwood stump 2 handspans from Sorrel's right hip and spat splinters into the blue cornmeal at her feet. The air snapped around her like a sheet whipped on a line. Hasty and Nez did not move, but that lack of movement itself was emotion. The 200 drew breath together and did not exhale. Sorrel's hand stayed open. She did not reach for the rifle in the dust behind her. She did not step backward or forward. She stood next to Hasty and Nez, and the sun cut across her face like the blade of a new promise. On the ridge, men shouted, hands grabbing at reins and barrels, pride and fear mixing in a small clay pot too hot to hold. Hasty and Nez leaned the smallest measure toward Sorrel so only she could hear. Daughter, he said softly, as if you were speaking to one of his own and not a stranger. Keep breathing. I will, she said, and realized she already had been. A second rifle lifted on Howell's ridge, and Sorrel saw the glitter of its sight find her chest with the bright certainty of a fly discovering sugar. The morning held its breath a fraction longer, and then, from the draw below, a voice Sorrel knew shouted a name that did not belong to any of the men on the ridge. Caleb Lorne rode into view at a dead run, hat in his hand, face carved by the hours since midnight. He was screaming, and the sound of it tore through the 200 like a thrown rock through still water. Fire in the wash, the law's man's down, and the traitors coming with papers and men. The second rifle fired. The world went white. The world went white, a brightness so pure it erased edges, sky from stone, breath from prayer. Sorrel did not feel fear first, she felt the absence of sound, the way a creek does the instant before it drops as a waterfall. Splinters sang past her ear. The cottonwood stump spat dust into the blue cornmeal at her boots. Somewhere, a horse made a sound like a man being told something he already knew. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The white flashed to color all at once. Sorrel's breath came back like a hand finding hers in the dark. The second rifle's smoke drifted in a thin seam across the ridge where Howell's men twisted in their saddles, faces small and stiff in the newborn sun. Caleb Lorne burst into full sight in the draw below, hat gone, hair flat with sweat, breaking his lathered horse so hard the animal sank to its hocks. He was still shouting, the words breaking against the stone, fire in the wash, the law's man down, and the traitors coming with papers and men. Sorrel's body read the scene without asking her mind. She took one long step and put herself half an arm's length nearer to Hasty and Nez, where a bullet meant for argument might hit bone instead of a woman with blue cornmeal swirling around her ankles. Her palms stayed open. Her knees wanted to tremble and did not, because she told them no. Hold, said Hasty and Nez and Dine, and the word moved through the 200 like a hawk moves through a flock, quick, silent, obeyed. The line of riders did not lift their rifles. They did not advance. They drew breath together in that measured way of men who decide to aim with patience before they aim with iron. On the opposite ridge, Deputy Pike threw his arm out in a cutting motion that would have looked comic if it had not been necessary. Cease, he barked toward his own line. Two of his men dropped their muzzles, chastened, shame-angry in the set of their shoulders. Bracken Howell did not drop anything. A smile cut his face in half and showed teeth that had bitten through better men's reputations. Caleb slid from the saddle, stumbled, caught himself with his palms in the gravel, and straightened with blood on one knuckle and the look of a man who had outrun one mistake and now saw a field of them ahead. He saw Sorrel and the sight steadied him, as if someone had offered him a handle in a fast river. Had to tell you, he said, breath-tearing. Wash took a spark from some fool's cook fire. It's running like a fuse along the grass toward the post. And they're bringing ledgers. And men. His eyes cut to Howell and back. More than the 4. Thank you, Sorrel said, and meant it in the way people mean water. She felt the thread of her attention tug toward the direction of the trading post. Imagine the wash grass crackling like paper held too close to a candle. Imagine the dry willows leaning their narrow bodies into harm. Comet would be far by now. She refused to imagine his gray coat gleaming in firelight. Hasty and Nez shifted his horse one hoof's breadth, small as a yes that did not need to be spoken aloud. Daughter, he said in English, his gaze still on Pike and Howell. Breathe. I am, she said, and the surprise of that truth made her grin too quickly and then let it go. Mr. Howell, Pike said, spine stiff enough to splinter. There will be no more shooting without my order. Your order, Howell sneered, comes from men who write their names small so no one can blame them later. Mine comes from families who expect their contracts to be honored. You want to pass a hat for goats to replace cattle? Or will you grow a conscience big enough to herd 200 savages off a ridge? The word hit the air like a bucket of slops flung into clean water. Sorrel felt it splatter and watched it sink. Hasty and Nez did not blink. We have asked with our voices, he said. You fired at my daughter's friend. That is a poor answer. Bring the prisoner. Bring the traitor. We will look at the paper together. If your paper is truth, we will do what truth asks. If your paper is a lie, we will send it to a winter fire and watch it turn to a lesson. On the ridge, movement, small, fast, out of place. A man too young for his mustache shifted his rifle, sight wobbling like an untrained colt. Sorrel's skin prickled the way it does when a rattlesnake hums before it is entirely awake. Left of Pike, she said without turning her head. Second from the bay with the crooked blaze. Hasty and Nez did not need to look. One low word and dine. A man 3 horses down from him let his rope slip, it snaked out and lifted the muzzle of the overeager rifle as neatly as a mother raises a child's chin when she wants to see if he is lying. The young man on the ridge yelped and then caught himself, face flaring pink, eyes cutting to Pike to see if he had been seen. He had. Enough, Pike said, and for a breath it was a prayer. Hoofbeats from the south came like rain before rain, a soft gathered insistence without the crash. Dust gathered low along the road. The trader's wagon rolled into sight, tarpaulin tied tight over crates, 2 men riding ahead, 2 flanking, and 1 behind with a rifle loose and easy as a friend. The trader, Elijah Cutter, not Sam, Sorrel corrected herself when the sun pinched his narrow face into recognition, sat small on the wagon seat and tried to look like a piece of furniture caught in the wrong room. That was his trick, to seem less until the numbers added up and it was too late. Speak, Hasty and Nez said, voice the weight of river rock. Let us see your paper. Elijah Cutter lifted both hands as if to show he had nothing and everything. Morning, he said, and his tone had the oily care of someone who wants you to be angry in a way that makes you smaller. Mr. Howell tells me there's been a misunderstanding. I brought my books. I'll stand by anything that has ink and a date next to it. Stand by your sister's baby, Caleb muttered, low enough that only Sorrel heard. She did not smile. It was a cruel thought spoken in pity, and this morning was not the place for that kind of mercy or cruelty. Pike signaled, and 2 of his men picked their way down toward the flat where Sorrel's yard met the arroyo verge, the place the blue cornmeal line pointed like a quiet river. Howell kept his men on the ridge, their muzzles too still to be comfortable. Hasty and Nez turned his head half an inch. 2 of his own dismounted and moved like rocks learning to walk, unnoticed until you trip over them. They placed themselves between Sorrel's porch and the wagon without touching anything and yet touching the entire shape of the morning. Sorrel felt the fact of her own hands. She kept them open. She kept her feet on the cornmeal. That line was not magic in the way a fool means the word. It was discipline, like a song sung under your breath to keep your steps even on loose stones. Dolly and Najoni appeared at the edge of Hastings' line as if the air had put down 2 swift birds. Sorrel did not see them arrive. She turned and their faces were there, breath high in their chests but not fast, eyes swift. Najoni's mouth twitched at Sorrel's boots and the blue dust shrinking in her steps. Dolly's glance went to the cottonwood stump with its new scar, then to Sorrel's jacket where a splinter had chewed the fabric threadbare. Dolly did not speak. She pressed Sorrel's forearm with 2 fingers and released it. A touch like a vow. Aztze Najoni set her horse at Sorrel's other shoulder as if she had been put there by the earth. The 4 of them made a small straight line even without trying. Sorrel felt stronger and more afraid at once. The feeling charged her body like air just before lightning. She breathed it and did not let it make her move. Elijah climbed down with his ledger in both hands. The book had weight and grease and honesty in it the way a liar's hands do when he holds his child, something true, misused. He placed it on Sorrel's table as if the table were a flat stone beside a shallow river. I keep a clean book, he said, too loud. Any man can look. Any woman too, seeing as how the law lets you talk today. Pike's eyes flicked to Sorrel's table and then to her face, as if he had just now noticed that his order of things had rearranged in the night. Let's have it, he said. Let's see what you've got written that we can all read out loud. Elijah opened to the page with the famous blue Ark of the Canyon red quartz stamp. The ink had bled into the cheap paper in a way that made the ark wobble if you knew what a steady hand and good parchment do. 20 head delivered, Elijah said, voice a little steady drum. 4-year steers with Howell's 8B brand, earnick left. Agreed price, $60 a head. Partial payment by Goats and Hide, credited here. Remaining due. Stop, Sorrel said, and the word came out warmer than she'd intended, like iron pulled from a coal's bed too soon. 4-year steers with 8B brand and left ear nick? She touched the column with one blunt fingertip. In September of last year? Yes, Elijah said, crisp with performance. I've signed and the judge has stamped. Sorrel looked at Hasty and Nez, then back at the page. In September of last year, Howell's hand Amos Whitaker put right ear nicks on every steer at the South Pens because a thief had been cutting the left in spring and calling calves his. Your foreman told me so when he came asking if my fence cut his draw. The nick is in the right ear after June. The brand is true. The nick is not. Pike's eyes narrowed. You're sure? I stood with my hand on the gate while they did it, Sorrel said. Right ear. You can check the scar now on any steer that wintered in these canyons. Paper remembers poorly next to hide. Elijah's mouth pinched, and it would have been comical if the day were less sharpened. A clerk could copy left for right. What matters is they were Howell's steers. What matters, Hasty and Nez said, is if they came here at all. His voice was so calm it made Sorrel want to cry and then laugh. Where's the mark of their hooves between Howell's pens and my corrals? Elijah flipped a page. Freight receipt. From who? Sorrel asked. From the man who took them? Or the man who said the man took them? Elijah didn't answer the question. He ran along his line like a man runs his thumb along a scar he can hide with a shirt sleeve. Freight receipt, yes, signed by Caleb Lorne. Caleb went still without getting stiff. Sorrel felt the change rather than seeing it. It was how grass moves when a breeze is just beginning. Caleb's jaw worked. He did not look at Sorrel. I was told to carry a note from Howell's yards to Cutter's porch, he said. I signed the bottom when Cutter said it made me a witness to a thing I didn't watch. He swallowed. I didn't watch any steers go anywhere. I watched my mother sleep with cold feet and thought $60 would warm them. Elijah spread his hands in that way cowards do when they want to seem generous. You can stand there and turn the air into milk for this story, or you can settle a simple debt and ride home. Bring the prisoner, Hasty and Nez said again. Bring my brother. Bring him, Pike snapped to Howell, faster than he might have yesterday. Alive. Howell's smile fell and showed the face behind it. You give them an inch, he said through his teeth, and you'll watch your badge ask you for a new shirt to pin itself to. He jerked his chin at one of his men. The man kicked his horse and rode back along the ridge, disappearing behind the spine toward the road that led down to the post. Sorrel felt the day tilt. Something had changed. Not in the air but in the way men looked at each other. The kind of change you can't see until a long time later when you look back and draw a line and realize that was when you started to move. Smoke lifted to the south like a thought someone ought to have had earlier. It rose thin at first and then took shape like a question mark. Sorrel sniffed and smelled grass. Her body remembered fire like it remembers a lover you left because you had to, everything at once, all the warnings and the want. The wash had taken the spark Caleb had promised. If a wind came up from the east, it would bring the smoke straight into her yard, then find the haystack by the lean-to the way a fox finds a hen that's learned the wrong habits. Fire, Caleb said aloud, pointing, because some truths need the dignity of being named where everyone can hear them. And not small. Hasty and Nez did not turn his head, but 3 of his men were already sliding off, their horses folded under them like cloth, hands making the quick work of untying the green boughs they had carried draped like shawls. We will fight it, he said. We have been fighting white men's fires and our own since before Howell's grandfather asked someone else to bring him his bread. Pike stared at the smoke as if it had broken a rule he had posted on a tree. He gave 2 orders at once, go, to 2 different men in 2 different directions. The men hesitated, and in that small moment Sorrel saw why rigid men fear chaos. Not because they cannot stand noise, but because when 2 honest tasks present themselves, their kind of order does not know which to bless. She knew. Backburn, she said to Caleb and Azze Najoni at once. If the wind shifts, we light it first near the basalt spill. It'll eat all the dry cheat and meet the main fire with nothing left to swallow. You will burn your own pasture, Pike said, shocked, as if she had proposed cutting a child's hair at a funeral. I'll burn a line, Sorrel said. Lines save lives. She tasted the bitterness of saying it and the honey of knowing it was right. She turned to Hasty and Nez. I will not leave your side while you speak. But if the wind turns, I will move. He inclined his head. You are a woman after my sister's heart, he said. It is good to be near a heart like that when men are about to make their worst mistakes. Bring the prisoner, he said once more, and the fourth time was not louder, it was heavier. They brought him on a mule. The sight made Sorrel's shoulders drop half an inch with a relief so sharp it hurt. A man who has been bound in ropes still sits like a man if the men who bound him did not mean to kill him in an hour. The prisoner, tall, rope-boned, eyes like black stones under water, had a split along one cheekbone and blood dried like rust under his right nostril. He sat straight and quiet as prayer and did not look at Howell. He looked at Hasty and Nez and Aztze Najoni and then at Dolly and Najoni, and the way his eyelids softened was the sound of a soft thing being set down carefully. Brother, Aztze Najoni said, joy held in with two expert hands, tight and loving. Brother, Hasty and Nez returned, and it was a sentence that meant, are you whole? Are you angry? Are you ashamed? Are you ready? Are you alive? The man nodded. I am here, he said simply, and somehow and that was the inventory of everything that mattered. Release him to my custody, Pike said automatically, as if the sentence had been taught to his mouth the way boys are taught to say yes, ma'am to women they plan not to listen to. Pending a hearing. Release him to his own feet, Hasty and Nez said. Pending truth. We will make a circle where men can hear each other before the papers crackle. Howell clucked his horse forward. No need to make a pageant of it, he said. He goes to the jailhouse at the post until a judge meets the docket. The jailhouse, Sorrel said, and put 3 notes of disbelief in the word, enough for herself, Aztze Najoni, in the morning. That door with the broken latch that sticks in heat and the back window with the chicken wire? You mean the room where you will sweat and not sleep while you tell Elijah's books how to spell right ear like left? Howell's eyes cut. You talk long for a woman without a horse. And you talk short for a man without a conscience, Sorrel said. Her voice had the same calm she used when walking into a stall where a frightened mare had cornered herself between 2 bad choices. Here's the circle. She turned, stepped to the exact center where the blue cornmeal line crossed itself at the cottonwood stump's shadow, and drew with one boot a ring in the dust. Paper in the middle. Men around the edge. Guns outside. I am not a chief, but I own a yard. While we're standing in it, we'll act like we know what that means. Hasty and Nez slid from his horse as if the ground had asked him to. He stepped into the ring and set his rifle outside it on the cottonwood stump. The 200 moved as if a hand had guided them, muzzles lowered, horses sidled back to a patient distance, one man walking each horse back a dozen paces and turning them to watch. Aztze Najoni stepped into the ring with her brother and Dolly and Najoni, and then she stepped back out with the girls and left the men where men needed to be, trusting them to carry what had to be carried. Pike hesitated 2 heartbeats longer than he would have yesterday, then dismounted with a grunt that was both habit and humility and placed his pistol on the stump near Hastings' rifle. 2 of his men followed suit, uneasy and then surprised at feeling lighter. Howell did not dismount. His smile came back like a crack in a dry pond bed when the sun hits it and makes it look like a pattern instead of a wound. Elijah held his book as if it might sprout legs and run. We can do this all day, he said. I get paid by the hour. No, Sorrel said. You get paid by the inch. She pointed to a column where numbers had climbed like vines in 9 days that had no rain. You credited hide weight here that no one could have scraped off without a barrel of brine. And here, she tapped where the judge's blue arc overlapped a number. You moved a date. The stamp sits on the belly of a 3 you tried to make an 8. Elijah flushed. You know a lot for someone who lives where men don't write. My father taught me to count by calves, Sorrel said. My mother taught me to count by teaspoons of baking powder. If you get either wrong, something dies or something doesn't rise. Either way, you learn. Hasty and Nez spoke, soft. Brother, he said to the man who had been brought to the ring. Did you receive cattle from Howell? No, the man said. I received a promise from a trader married to a promise from a man who likes paper. He smiled without humor. I have been married to worse and better. Laughter moved around the ring like a breeze, shocked and grateful. Humor did that, it gave everybody permission to be human again. Then the paper lies, Hasty and Nez said, and nobody needed the blessing of a judge to feel the shape of that truth land. Howell clucked his horse again. We're done here, he said. Pike, arrest someone. Anyone. Make yourself useful. This is a farce. Pike did not move. He looked at the smoke line, now thicker, bowing a little toward the north where sorrel's hay and the dry fence posts stood like mourners who haven't learned how to hold their hands. The wind turned its face. Sorrel felt it on her neck like the fingertip of trouble. Now, she said, and there was no time to pull the word into a voice that sounded reasonable. It went out flat and urgent. She threw a look at Hasty and Nez that was both apology and command. I have to burn the line. He nodded once. Go, he said. We will finish as we should. Caleb, Sorrel snapped, already moving. Rakes and shovels from the lean-to. You, she pointed at two of Hastings' men, then at Aztse-Najoni and the girls. Green boughs. The saltsita by the ditch. You'll hate it on your hands and thank it on your face. She did not run toward the basalt spill. She walked hard. Running at a fire before you set a backburn makes you light wrong, too big, too fast, too greedy. She wanted control, not drama. She struck a kitchen match from the box she kept in her back pocket, its sulfur sour as old fear in her nose, cupped it, coaxed it to a small tongue. She fed it each breath she had like a mother who has to pretend she has enough for everyone. The first tuft of cheatgrass caught with a greedy whisper. Sorrel placed the flame where it would do least harm and most good, a curve-hugging bare rock, a pocket with nothing but dust and old feather and the memory of water. The fire walked as if it had been told its place. That was the thing about fire, respect it and it will show you its manners, insult it and it will show you yours. Caleb appeared at her side with a rake and a face that said I will listen. He dragged a strip of grass away from the new burn, clearing a path while the wind did the work. Aztse-Najoni and the girls beat at the low flames with saltsita boughs, the green leaves coughing steam and a sharp smell that lodged pleasant and bitter on Sorrel's tongue. The main fire arrived like an argument that had been building in someone else's house all evening and decided to break plates in yours. It rolled along the wash, climbing the banks like a dog finding its feet on a steep creek bed. It hit the black line Sorrel had laid and stood up taller out of surprise, as if it had expected a feast and found a fast day. It took 2 quick breaths and then sagged. Fire is a kind of animal. It knows when to save itself for later. Behind them, voices rose. Sorrel did not turn. The ring was behind her, and in it men were learning how to speak or not speak. She did not have a hand to lend to that lesson. She had this one: keep the black line honest, keep the wind talking to it in the right syllables, keep the people she had arranged breathing without coughing too much heat into their lungs. Right of the stump, Caleb said, and she saw it as he spoke, a thin finger of flame climbing toward a pocket of last year's weeds under the fence rail. Najoni darted in and slapped it with the bough in a rhythm that made Sorrel's heart pinch with fondness. There are girls born to be eldest and girls born to be youngest and girls born to be necessary. Najoni was the third. Dolly held the longer line with Aztse-Najoni, beating back the eager edges, breath steady, eyes reading the burn like words. Good, Sorrel said, and it was one of the best prayers she knew. The wash fire hit the backburn in earnest then. The two fires shook hands and discovered they had nothing left to talk about. The sound dropped a register and then another. The heat folded back on itself. Smoke rose vertical for a breath and then flattened, ugly but honest. A tiny lizard darted from one black triangle to another and halted, flummoxed, and then found a strip of cool earth and sped on. Life did what it does when people make a mess, it worked around us. Sorrel wiped her face with her forearm. Soot made a dark crescent there she would see later in the tin mirror and think of flocks of birds for no good reason beyond shape. She tasted salt and ashes and almost laughed. The day had flipped cards none of them had expected, and still somehow everyone was playing the hand. A shout from the ring made her turn. Two men she did not know had closed distance too fast and too proud. Pike stood with his palm up between them and a surprise in his eyes that read as, "I have a hand for this after all." Howell, still mounted, pulled his bay in a tight circle like a man who has never learned that tight circles make horses' mouths hard. He leveled his voice like a rifle and pointed it at the men without looking at Pike. "Enough talk," he said. "We lose the day arguing about goats while paper gets wet." "It won't get wet," Sorrel said, and then she saw why she had spoken. The trader's boy, a narrow thing with wrists too open and a determination too honest, held the ledger and a canteen at once. He was trying not to slosh and trying to help, and was going to ruin evidence in the middle of a morning that needed edge more than blur. "Set it down," she called. "On the stump. Step back." He did, quick with relief. She didn't smile. If she did, he would try harder and hurt something. Through it all, Hasty and Nez had not raised his voice. He stood in the ring like a tree that had learned stillness by being winded every winter for 40 years. He looked at Howell and then at Elijah and then at Pike. "We have our answer," he said. "The paper is a lie. We will take my brother and go. We will send goats to the trader's sister this winter because babies have nothing to do with lies. We will cut a notch in our memory for Howell." He lifted his chin one finger width. "And if he touches my daughters or any of my people again with paper or iron, we will notch more than memory." "You think you get to leave?" Howell said softly, delighted the way men get when they know a surprise and think the surprise will make them taller. "You think you get to walk out of this yard with a man who owes me $60 a head and insulted my brand with your dirty livestock?" He turned the bay and pointed with his chin toward the south where Sorrel's lower pasture ran toward the fence line. "I lit you a match, Miss March. It'll keep your hands busy while I tidy the rest." "Already put it out," Sorrel said, and in an ordinary year she might have enjoyed saying it more. "You'll have to tidy your own character without my fire for cover." Howell's smile took on a different shape, small, private, ugly. "Then here's a different heat," he said. He touched his boot to the bay's side. The horse leaped, not because it had been asked but because it had been told. Howell's men on the ridge moved the way men do when they're relieved to be finally doing the thing their bodies have been gearing up for all morning. They swung their rifles toward the draw, not at Hastings 200 but at the road along the wash. Sorrel felt the hair lift on the back of her neck at the same instant. Caleb swore softly. The trader's wagon driver, Elijah's cousin, she remembered now, a good boy who had made the mistake of getting used to doing what the man with the ink told him, had turned the wagon a fraction, enough to show the gap between tarpaulin and box. Under the canvas, stacked like loaves cooling under a towel, lay 3 sticks of dynamite bound to 6 more. A fuse snaked like a snake that had learned to be metal instead of muscle. "Howell," Pike said, low and flat. "Don't." "Lawman," Howell said without looking at him, "you can either keep your badge or your face. Choose." He lifted his hand and snapped his fingers as if he were calling a dog. The boy with the fuse flinched. Sorrel saw it, the second of youth inside a grown-up frame that wanted to obey and wanted also to remain the kind of person who did not light things he couldn't unlight. He looked at Elijah the way sons look at fathers when the father is not actually their father but has borrowed the role and cheapened it. Elijah nodded once, his mouth a tight line. The boy bent. Sorrel's body moved before she could humor it with reasons. She was running, not careless, not a charge, but the kind of run you do when you have decided to take a hot pan off a stove before it burns the kitchen and you and the people you love. She went low and not straight. She crossed the wagon's shadow at an angle, eyes on the boy's hands, hands on the rope that held her knife. The knife arrived in her palm with the joy that comes from something made to fit its use. "Leave it," she said, and her voice had the thin steel of a new saw. "Put it down." "It's not lit yet," the boy said, voice wobbling toward the edge where men make their worst mistakes. "It's only Don't let it learn your name, Sorrel said. Things you light never forget who struck the match. Caleb was beside her with a movement that would make him sore later. He had both hands up, palms wide, the universal human language for, we can still choose. The boys saw the proof of that in Caleb's face and in the movement of Hastings' men and in the way Estse Najoni stood with her daughters where women stand when they've decided not to let a day make them less. He wavered. Howell saw the waver and spurred his bay forward, boot heel glancing off hair and hide like an insult. Light it, he snapped. Or I'll set a different fire with you. The boy struck the match. It flared and went out because his hands shook. He struck another. The head popped and bloomed, small sun on a small stick. He bent. Sorrel's knife flashed. She didn't go for the boy's wrist. She went for the cord, the place where rope is still rope and not yet a knot. The blade found the strand and bit. The wagon lurched, whether because the bay shouldered it or because Elijah's cousin, white-faced, had shifted his weight on the seat. Sorrel's knife skated and then caught. The cord snapped. The canvas sagged. The boy's match kissed the fuse. It hissed like a snake that woke up angry. Caleb swore again, higher. Back, he said. Back. No, Sorrel said, and didn't recognize her own voice. She clambered like a child, knees and elbows, onto the wagon tongue. The fuse skittered bright into shadow like a river into a canyon mouth. Knife, she said to no one, to everyone. Give me your knife. Dolly was there as if she had been born in that exact instant. She did not say take mine. She pushed the handle into Sorrel's palm and closed Sorrel's fingers around it. Her own hand was cold with fear and steady with practice. Sorrel ducked under the tarp. The air under there was old paper and dust, the smell of things set aside and meant to be forgotten. She put the knife where the hiss was and cut without looking. The fuse bucked and spit like a cattail in a cook fire. It burned her forearm. She did not say its name. She cut again. The hiss kept running, forward, into the dark. Jesus, Caleb said, voice breaking its own edges, it's double-wired. Triple, Elijah said from somewhere that should have been farther away. Mr. Howell likes insurance. Hasty and Nez's men moved as one shape. Two put their weight to the wagon and tipped it just enough to make the boxes shift and the fuse slide against a different edge. One reached for the glowing string and found it with gloved fingers. The glove smoked. The man did not move his hand until the smoke stopped. The second fuse, one Sorrel hadn't seen, flashed out from under the canvas like a snake surprised to find itself with company. It found air. It loved air. It sang louder. Sorrel reached and there was nothing to reach, the line ran away like a rabbit that knows which boulder has the right hole under it. She swallowed bile and fury and the kind of laugh that comes out of a person who sees their own death from the outside. Throw it, Pike shouted. Throw the whole damn thing into the wash. You throw it, Howell said, moving his bay backward 2 steps as if the day had made a joke especially for him. Caleb and Hasty and Nez's 2 men did not throw anything. They lifted. The wagon moved mean as a mule. The boxes slid again. The fuse burned toward a darkness that held more than dynamite, it held the shape of 200 futures in Sorrel's house and the idea that a yard can be a church if people agree it is one. Back! Sorrel shouted again, but this time the word wasn't to keep people safe. It was to make a space. The space opened like a good rope when you need it to. Her body found a lever she didn't know she'd planted in herself when she buried the last of her calves 3 springs ago and decided to keep going anyway. She wedged the knife's blade under the crate's corner and put her weight into the haft. Wood groaned. The crate shifted. The fuse skated along the edge. Dolly's hand was on Sorrel's belt, bracing her. Najoni's palm pressed the small of Dolly's back. Astse Najoni's shoulder took Sorrel's knee. 4 bodies, 1 motion. The crate tilted. The fuse sang. Sorrel saw the short bright line vanish into a hole she couldn't reach and understood that human hands were done making the choice for now. She pulled the blade free. Down, she said, and it was quieter than it should have been. They let go and the world seemed to hold its breath, the same small exact way it had before the second shot, before the fire hit the black line, before Caleb's horse had sat down hard in the draw. "Run it!" Pike yelled, desire and fear braided in his voice. "Run it now!" Hasty and Nez's hand found Sorrel's shoulder and turned her, not rough, not gentle, the way you turn a colt's head toward a safe gate. "Daughter," he said once. "Breathe." She did, and it felt like cutting a rope between herself and something that had already decided what to do. The fuse went on in the dark where nobody could see, past the canvas, past the splinters, past the way Sorrel had wedged her heart under a box and tried to lever the day back into sense. It reached whatever Mr. Howell's insurance had promised him. It met it. And the wagon coughed like a sick man, sagged as if it had remembered its age. And did not explode. For a fraction of a second, the morning was the quiet that comes inside a church when the baby everyone thought was going to cry decides to sleep instead. Sorrel felt the whole of her body ask, did we lie to ourselves about how this works? Did we make magic with cornmeal and good intentions? Did we take a breath at the same time and trick the universe into liking us? Elijah Cutter's cousin on the wagon seat made us sound like someone who has been told he does not have to die today. He looked at Sorrel like a boy looks at hail melting where the wheat should have been and knows, for once, that the storm passed around his house. Then a second cough, deeper, like a basement clearing its throat. The wagon's back end lifted 2 inches and came down hard. The canvas puffed out and tore along one seam. A sharp tearing smell passed over them, niter and something like damp matches, wrong for this dry day. Caleb's laugh broke out of him ragged and enormous. "Bad powder," he gasped. "Damp somewhere under all those lies." "Or good medicine," as Zainajoni murmured, not smiling, her palm still frank and firm at the small of Dolly's back as if the girl might be knocked over by a thought. "Seize it," Pike snapped, words slamming back into order like chairs into tables when a dance stops. "Seize the wagon. Mr. Howell, step away from the—" A rifle cracked from the ridge, the sound like a door slamming through a child's nap. The bullet went not for Sorrel and not for Hasty and Nez and not for the wagon. It took the brim of Pike's hat and folded it into his ear. He jerked aside, swore once, and did not reach for his pistol because he had left it on Sorrel's stump. Hasty and Nez's 200 did not fire. It would have been easy. They had shots measured and not taken in their bodies like prayers that hurt and make you strong. They watched. That is hard and holy in what separates men from boys. It made Howell angrier than any bullet would have. "Shoot!" Howell bellowed. "Shoot now, you cowards!" "No," Pike said, out loud and to himself and to the men on his ridge and to the men in his memory who had taught him a different word. He picked up his hat with his left hand, set it back on his head, brim mangled, and faced Howell square. "This is over. You brought powder into a circle where people were trying to use their mouths. You fired on an officer of the law. You aimed your men at civilians." His voice steadied as he spoke, as if it found its place inside his ribs and liked it. "You're under arrest." Howell laughed, not because it was funny but because he needed a sound to fill the space where his certainty had been. He kicked the bay hard. The horse tried to rear and failed, confused and sore-mouthed and mad. The movement set the animal's hindquarters into the wagon tongue. The torn canvas shifted again, and this time a crate slid clean off and hit the ground. The lid cracked like a tooth. Inside, nestled like lies waiting for their hour, sat not just powder but a leather folio with the judge's blue stamp burned into the cover. Elijah made a noise he had not made since he was a boy who got caught in church with his hand in the collection basket, high, helpless, the sound of someone who has just realized God reads ledgers, too. Hasty and Nez stooped, lifted the folio, and set it in the circle without ceremony. He opened it. Papers inside lay like fish belly up, names, numbers, dates that had been moved until they made a house for deceit to live in. He did not read them. He simply turned the folio to Pike. "Lawman," he said. "Do your work." Pike took the folio. He did not glance at Sorrel, which told her he understood that this was his step to take or miss without anyone else holding his elbow. He looked at one page, then another. His mouth thinned in that new way of his that meant he was trying not to tell the truth by shouting. He looked up at Elijah. "You signed these." Elijah's mouth opened and closed. "Mr. Howell." "You signed," Pike said again, and the repetition was not to humiliate, it was to anchor the day. "You married lies to ink. You called theft by a small name and thought the smallness would keep it from becoming what it was." He closed the folio. "You're under arrest, too." Howell's laughter went away like water poured out into dust. What replaced it was quieter and worse. "You think 200 Indians and one stubborn woman make you brave?" he asked Pike. "You think you get to fix the world in a yard with an ugly stump and a blue line and a house that should have burned an hour ago?" He leaned down and said, soft, not to Pike and not to Sorrel and not to Hasty and Nez, but to the boy with the matches who had not wanted to light them, "Son, you'll never get paid again if you don't finish a job." The boy flinched like a fish under a heron's shadow. He did not move. Howell moved for him. He sprang from the bay not with grace but with fury, hit the ground hard enough to jar his own teeth, reached under the canvas, and yanked the crate that had not broken. He had a knife in his hand that had signed more papers than it had caught rope. He laid it to the last fuse like a priest laying a wafer on a tongue. Sorrel had already begun to step, but the morning had taken too many steps of its own and was no longer taking cues from people. Howell lit the fuse with a scratch that sounded, absurdly, like someone lighting a cigar. The hiss leaped into the open air. And then, from the south, beyond the wash, beyond the smoke, beyond the weight of the day, a sound rose and rolled and changed the grammar of every sentence anyone was about to speak. It was thunder without storm, drums without hands, hooves, many, moving with the purpose of a story that has just understood itself. 200 more riders crested the low ridge beyond Sorrel's lower pasture, men and boys and 3 women who rode like they'd been born to teach men what a saddle was for, stripes of sun across their faces, hair black as new ravens' wings, rifles slung safe, not proud. At their head, a figure Sorrel did not know at first because the day glittered where faces should keep their secrets. When he lifted his hand, her heart fibrillated like a foal's knees. Dolly and Najoni both made a sound, small, involuntary, joy that couldn't be swallowed in time. The man at the front wore a familiar strip of blue cloth tied at his wrist, the same ribbon the girls had used to bind their hair. His cheek bore a new swollen bandage. His eyes were old and kind and sharpened like flint. He was Hasty and Nez's kin, no, he was Hasty and Nez's brother twice over now, by blood and by the morning. He lifted his hand and all the horses in both lines stopped breathing for the same second, the way a choir pauses at the same bar without being told where it is written. Howell's last fuse burned bright, short, greedy, in love with its own noise. And Sorrel realized in a clean, ice-cold rush that it wasn't running to the powder at all. It ran under the wagon tongue, along the dry plank floor, toward the little hollow where her blue cornmeal line had built a right angle with the stump's shadow. Toward the place she and Hasty and Nez had decided was the center of their mourning. Toward the paper in the ring, the folio open like a rib cage, the judge's blue stamp looking suddenly exactly like a brand. The fuse was not meant to kill bodies. It was meant to erase proof. "No!" Sorrel heard herself shout, the word ripping the fresh edge of the day. She threw herself forward into that stupid little holy circle she had told the morning to honor, hands reaching, mind already calculating burns and scars and what she could carry if she had to carry it forever. Hasty and Nez moved at the same instant, quiet as a hawk and twice as fast, hand darting for the flaming cord. The fuse hit the folio. And the papers took fire like tinder soaked in bad winter whiskey. Flame licked up the judge's blue arc, turned it into a hot smile, and grinned at Sorrel. Behind her, 200 rifles lifted with a sound like rain finding tin. The new riders on the far ridge cried out, half warning, half greeting. Caleb lunged with his gloved hand, slammed the folio shut, smoke boiling around his wrist, skin crisping under leather. Sorrel grabbed the smoking edge and yanked, and a shot cracked across the yard so hard it felt like a door had been ripped off the house of the day. And Hasty and Nez staggered, not from the bullet but from the force of the choice he made when he stepped between Sorrel and whatever came next, blood blooming on his sleeve like a flower that had grown in an instant where no one would have planted it. the fuse spat once more, looking for a lair to live in. It found the open end of the second crate Howell had dragged and forgotten. There was no time to think about powder, about damp, about mercy and the chemistry of fails and maybes. There was only breath. Sorrel took one, because he had told her to. The world drew its own. And everything that had been standing in her yard leaned toward a single, terrible answer. Answer. The air gathered itself, a lung filling before a shout. Sorrel felt the yard tip the way a dish tilts in the hands of someone about to pour. She did not see the blast. She knew it by the way her shoulder blades kissed without touching, by the way the hair at the back of her neck stood up as if the sky had laid a cold palm there. The powder went with a heavy cough instead of a throat-ripping roar. Heat banged the air flat. The wagon hopped and slammed back to earth. The canvas burst along a second seam and flapped like a wounded thing. Shards of wood spat outward and then lost their courage and fell. Sorrel stayed on her feet because Hasty and Nez's hand on her shoulder said so. The old man's sleeve tore and went dark. He had moved between her and the worst of it without taking his eyes off the men on the ridge. He staggered once, a tree taking a wind it has taken before and will not bow to now. Hold, he said in Dine, and the 200 did. The word dropped into their horses, into their hands, into the blackening air, and made a floor the morning could stand on again. The folio smoked and hissed where Caleb had slammed it shut. The leather blistered. Sorrel clamped both palms over the hot thing and felt her skin shout and kept it there. The smell was scorched paper and something like winter matches gone bad. She lifted it and thrust it into Pike's chest. Live evidence, she said, and her voice was very calm because the shaking could come later and not now. Don't let the wind own it. Pike hugged the folio like a newborn, awkward and fierce. His mangled hat sat crooked and made him look human in a way that might save him. I won't, he said, and it was a promise to more than the book. Howell tried to fill the air before anyone else could. Accident, he said, the syllables crisp and oily. Careless men. Not mine. Liar, said Azze Najoni without heat, and the word was a blanket laid gently over a snake. On the far ridge, the new riders drew up in that single breath Sorrel had felt in her bones, the power of many hooves arriving at once with one idea. For a heartbeat she thought, through smoke and blinding light, that the man leading them was the prisoner newly freed, the brother with the split cheek. Then the world steadied, and she saw her first mistake of the day that did not cost anyone blood, not him. Kin, yes, bone and story in the same direction, but not the same man. This one wore a blue ribbon at his wrist that matched the ribbon the girls had used to bind their hair, and he sat his horse with a bearing that made boys straighten their backs without knowing they had. Dolly made a sound in her throat that would have been a cry if she had been younger. Najoni made the same sound and turned it into a grin. Uncle, she breathed, and the word's shape softened her mouth even as her eyes stayed sharp. In Sorrel's yard, the last, stubborn flame worried at the cut end of a fuse and failed. The powder smelled wrong. It had drunk damp somewhere it shouldn't have. You brought city greed to country chemistry, Sorrel said, not to be cruel but because men sometimes needed a sentence they could not pretend not to understand. Powder doesn't lie for paper. Howell's eyes cut to her and then to the folio, now in Pike's hands, blotched with heat and smoke. His smile vanished so completely it looked like a different man had borrowed his face. I'll still own the ground you stand on, he said, quiet and vicious. It doesn't matter what burns or doesn't. Ground owns itself, Sorrel said. Men borrow it. Some return it better. Some don't return anything at all. She tasted the old ache that line always woke, graves on the hill, a white stone at the far end with a name she never said aloud before breakfast. She slid the ache back into its drawer. Today, you return my mourning. Deputy, Howell snapped, finding volume again. Arrest someone. Do your job. Pike did. Elijah Cutter, he said, voice firming like cooling iron, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to defraud. Mr. Howell, you're under arrest for the same, and for endangering the lives of civilians with explosive materials. He drew breath, found it held, and kept going. You will dismount. You will give up your weapon. If you refuse, I will call on every armed man here who understands decency to help me do what the badge on my chest says I do." One armed man, Howell taunted, but his voice had that small echo men get when they talk at the edge of a canyon and learn again that the canyon talks back. 2, if you count the stubborn woman. He looked beyond Pike to the 200. Or do you plan to hide behind Indians when your own law goes faint? Hide behind a woman, Sorrel said dryly. It's worked for you all morning. Laughter moved through Hasty and Nez's line like a summer wind that shifts the smell of water into your camp, quick, grateful, almost a blessing. It loosened something dangerous in the air. Even Pike's mouth twitched as if to admit that humor was a kind of truth-telling he had not known how to do until this day crowded him into it. Howell made another choice, the one men like him always save for last because it costs pride. He turned his bay and dug both heels in. He did not get 2 strides. A lariat flicked from Hastings' right flank, coiled tight by a man whose face did not move. The loop found Howell's wrist instead of his neck because that hand held the reins, and a horse does not deserve to pay for a rider's sins. Howell yelped, lost balance, lost his seat, and met his own dust with his own teeth. His boot caught in the stirrup, and for a breath Sorrel saw the shape of the death he had almost bought, a small bright picture of a man dragged by his own impatience. The rope went slack in the same heartbeat, and Howell fell free, sprawled and humiliated and very much alive. "Unnecessary roughness," Caleb muttered, not loudly enough for anyone to take it for a joke if they didn't want to. Sorrel did want to. She needed to. "Bind him," Pike said. His voice did not shake. "Gentle, he is still human." He put a hand out, left hand, burned forearm showing angry red where the glove had failed, and touched the back of the trader's boy's head the way you pat a frightened colt after you've walked him past something that tried to take his courage. "You did not light what couldn't be put out," he said. "Remember that when men say the rest." The boy nodded once, hard, like a promise made to himself and then to the world in that order. The ring in Sorrel's yard held. The blue cornmeal line had scattered where boots and hooves had made their own decisions, but the arc still read as a circle to anyone who wanted to read it that way. Hasty and Nez looked down at the place where a bullet had splintered the cottonwood's dead heart and then at the place where the fuse had tried to eat the folio. "We will go," he said. "We will take my brother. We will take Elijah's name to the snow when it comes and let it cool his temper before spring." He glanced at Sorrel, a question shaped like a small inclination of his head. "And we will leave something." She smiled despite everything. "Leave your boot prints," she said. "They improve the place." He kissed his teeth, a tiny, private acknowledgement, and turned to the man who had led the second line. "Brother," he said, and the word held both blood and gratitude. "You came when my daughters asked you to come." The man inclined his head in the exact weight and angle of Hastings, the way water mirrors water. "I came because they cut their hair," he said. "Children do not make medicine like that for small errands." His eyes moved to Sorrel's hands, burned and open, and then to her face. "And because someone held their hair where her fire sleeps and did not let dogs of any color touch it." Sorrel felt heat burn her throat in a different way than powder had. "Dolly and Najoni paid me in stories," she said. "They still owe interest." "We will pay with more than stories," Astse Najoni said, and her smile was a sliver and then a full moon and then gone. "We will pay with horses." Sorrel stiffened, not to refuse but because the word hit every empty stall in her mind at once and set them to humming. "That isn't why." "I know why," Astse Najoni said. "And I know what makes walking into wind easier." She raised her hand and spoke 2 words into the air and died. A boy barely older than Najoni eased a rope forward out of the line, and a dun mare stepped from the crowd as if a door had opened that had always been there and no one had noticed. She was leggy without being foolish about it, hip-boned and clean in the shoulder, with a dark stripe down her back and the kind of eye that meets you halfway without flattery. She stopped when Sorrel breathed. Sorrel did not reach. She let the mare look. Then she lifted her hand slow as a sunrise and touched the place an old trainer had told her to touch first, the pucker where the neck meets the chest, the place with nerves like a secret room. The mare leaned. Her name is Leonady, the uncle said. Horse born in the wind. He rolled the word like stone on tongue, like something that had earned its syllables. You can call her Windfall if you do not want to chew our consonants. She will carry you when you need to move and stand with you when you need to be a wall. Sorrel's laugh came out and surprised her with its young sound. Windfall, she said obediently, because she did not trust her mouth to be worthy of the dying name. I'll keep her honest. She will keep you honest, Najoni corrected gently, and they grinned at each other like sisters who had found each other after a long road that had told them they were walking alone. By the time Pike's men had bound Howell and Elijah, by the time the trader's boy had been sent to the post with instructions stronger than Howell's money, by the time Hasty and Nez's brother had been given back the rope-burned skin of his wrists and the quiet that comes with air you can breathe without asking, the smoke to the south had turned from a question into an answer, black eaten into brown eaten into nothing. The backburn had done what it was born for. The wash lay ugly and safe. We go, Hasty and Nez said simply. He swung into his saddle, the motion a prayer that had been said so often the saying of it had worn a groove in the world. Lawman. He tipped his chin to Pike. You will come to speak when we call you to speak. Not with paper. With your voice. Pike nodded, the smallest of bows, the first he had probably given in years. I will, he said, and meant it from a new part of himself he had not used until that morning. Hastian turned to Sorrel. Daughter, he said. She lifted her chin and accepted the word as if it had always belonged to her and she had only been waiting for someone to say it. Father, she answered, not to claim him from his own children, she would never be so foolish, but to name the work he had done in her yard that morning, to steady, to instruct, to tell the truth without flinching. The word made Dolly's eyes shine. Najoni made a small sound that could have been a laugh or the start of a song. They moved like weather. 200 and more stepped off the ridge and poured down like water that knows where it is welcome. Hastian's brother lifted his hand in a small, shy salute to Sorrel as he passed. The uncle with the blue ribbon gave Caleb a look that said, You are seen, do not pretend you are not. Najoni, last, reached out and touched Sorrel's burned forearm with 2 fingers. Water and grease, she said. Not salve. You know this. I know it now, Sorrel said. I will pretend I knew it before. They both laughed, and it did not sound like crows. It sounded like women who had decided to keep each other from becoming mean with age. When the last hoofstep faded like a dwindling drum, when dust hung in curtains that the new wind lifted and folded and put away, Sorrel looked around her yard and took inventory the way her father had taught her, out loud, under her breath. House, she said. Standing. Table. 2 cups. Rifle. Clean. Windmill. Tick. Trough. Full. Hair. She stopped. The doeskin bundle lay where she had set it earlier, on the shelf by the hearth, between the salt and the beans. She touched it with the back of one finger and found the cool piece of a promise kept. Windfall nosed her shoulder and made a small exhale that sounded like a shy person gathering courage. Sorrel turned and put her forehead against the mare's temple for 1 breath, then 2. The yes in the horse's body met the yes in Sorrel's and made a 3rd yes, the kind you can build a day on. Miss March, Pike said softly from the door, hat in his hands like a man who has finally found a use for humility. May I trouble you for water? You may trouble me for 2 buckets, Sorrel said, already moving. 1 for you and 1 for my new horse. She drew from the well herself, even though Caleb had stepped forward to do it. 2 pulls, 3, the rope squealing in that good way that means old things are working. The bucket came up cold. She sloshed into a dipper and into her own mouth and then into a tin cup for Pike and then into a pan for Windfall, who drank with the economy of an animal who trusted her thirst to be met again. Pike swallowed and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He watched Howell, now roped to his own saddle horn and being led toward the post by 2 men who would have liked to tie the rope tighter and did not. He watched Elijah stumbling and did not look away. You'll be called, he said to Sorrel. To testify. To say what you saw and what you know about ears and nicks and what day the tank cracked. I'll come, Sorrel said. I will wear a dress if I must, but I will speak like a woman who wears pants. Pike's mouth twitched again. It will do the court good. He set the cup on the porch rail and stood a long breath as if the yard kept him from falling. Thank you, he said finally. For all of it. For not letting me wreck the morning trying to be a man when I needed to be a decent one. If you'd wrecked it, Sorrel said, we would have built something out of the pieces. She nodded at the backburn, now a black necklace along the wash. That's what people do when they're not too proud. He went, shoulders squared differently than they had been when he arrived, as if someone had hung weight on him and he had decided not to shrug it off. Caleb lingered. He leaned against the porch post like a man pretending to rest so he doesn't admit he doesn't know where to go. I reckon I have to choose a town, he said finally. Or a trail that isn't bought. Choose a fence line, Sorrel said. Help me mend it. He blinked at her. You don't know me. I know the look of a man who watered his horse, she said. And the sound of one who tells a deputy the truth when lying would get him out of the heat faster. She shrugged. Besides, I am short one ranch hand and long on work. Caleb looked at Windfall, then at the trough, then at the blue cornmeal smeared to sky and dust at her feet. I don't like Howell, he said, as if that were a qualification. I don't either, Sorrel said. That makes two of us. Can you put a post in straight? I can try, he said. You'll do, she said. Windfall's ear flicked. Sorrel scratched the mare's jaw and felt her own life tilt on new hinges, light ones, oiled, working. Not noiseless, but honest. She slept in the chair by the window that night because her body had been told not to sleep, and sometimes it takes a while to persuade it the story has changed. She woke twice to coyotes remarking on the interesting smell the wash had left behind. She woke once and thought she heard Dolly's voice outside and found only the willow's leaves flipping their pale bellies to the stars. The last time she woke, it was because of rain. It came in a small, precise way, as if the sky had decided to be delicate with them. 3 drops on the porch roof. 4 on the hinge. 1 on the back of her hand. She smiled like a woman being told a small joke by a friend and went out barefoot to stand where the blue cornmeal line had been. She lifted her palms to the rain and let the drops find the tender skin there. Windfall came to stand with her and put her nose under Sorrel's wrist with the confidence of a creature who has decided the world is still a good idea. Morning after such a day is always a bright thing and a mean thing. You see what survived and what didn't with too much clarity. The wash lay black and safe. The cottonwood stump looked as if it had pulled its coat tight and waited out a winter. The bullet scar in its heart was a dark eye that would never close. The yard held the geometry of the circle and the scatter of men's feet. The table inside held the scorched edge of the folio's leather, the proof that even lies photograph themselves in heat if someone holds them steady long enough. Dolly and Najoni came at noon like 2 birds who had agreed to take different routes and met over the same fence. They brought meat jerky in a length of bright woven sash and a shy boy with a sack of cornmeal who could not stop looking at Windfall. Astse Najoni came with them and did not pretend she was just passing by. Hasty and Nez did not. He had gone to make a circle at the post that did not involve Sorrel's yard and to teach men there how to stand while talking. Payment, Dolly said, setting the jerky and the sash on the table. She tucked her hair behind her ear, and Sorrel saw the blunt cut again and felt an ache and a pride that had nothing to do with her. And a story. 2, because we owe interest. 2, Sorrel said agreeably, and leaned against the post like a woman who had time. Begin. Najoni began. She told the story of the wash, of the way Comet had found his feet like an old saint walking on water, of the way Caleb had made a small fire and then set it behind his back. She told it with her hands and her eyebrows and the sharp little pauses that make a listener lean forward. Sorrel's chest hurt with how much she liked the girl. Dolly told the story of the yard, of the way Sorrel had put blue cornmeal down and made men step into magic without forcing them to admit it. She told it with less embroidery and more stone, and Sorrel liked that too. She liked that the world could carry 2 kinds of telling and not crack. Astse Najoni listened and did not correct, only added the small, Necessary notes that make a story edible for old people. When they finished, she set a third thing on the table, a small pouch with a smell like morning in it. Pollen, she said. You will know how to use it or you will learn. Either way, do not be stingy with the gratitude that carries it. Sorrel bowed her head. I won't, she said, and she meant both the pollen and the gratitude. Before they left, Dolly ducked into the barn and came out with a length of new rope. For Windfall, she said. The old halter has seen too many moods. She grinned at Caleb where he was setting a post with more determination than accuracy. You too. Caleb saluted with the post hole digger and almost fell into the hole. Najoni laughed and clapped once, delighted by other people's grace in their own foolishness. 3 days later, Pike sent a boy out with a message that the hearing would be held in front of the post, not inside, with the door open so even the wind could testify if it wanted. Sorrel put on her second-best dress because the best was for burying and she did not intend to bury anyone that day. She braided her hair without looking in the mirror because mirrors make you late and the day doesn't care if you've centered the ribbon. Caleb drove the small wagon. Windfall followed with her own opinion about speed. The sky had a pale band at its belly that promised a weather change if men behaved or not. At the post, Hasty and Nez stood with his hands behind him and his face set to calm. The ring formed itself because people had seen one and wanted another that worked. Pike read names. Elijah Cutter had shaved too close and showed red patches still angry at his face. Howell wore a suit that pretended it could not smell the smoke clinging to it. The judge from Canyon Red had come, and he did not look like a man who enjoyed being outdoors. He looked like a man who had recently been told that paper is not God. Sorrel spoke when called. She said right ear and left ear and watched the judge's pen hesitate as if it had never had to choose between sides of a body before. She said September and tank crack in winter, and the wind lifted the words and took them through other men's shirts to touch their skin and remind them they were the kind that chill. She did not embellish. The truth did not need flowers to make it sit up straight. Elijah spoke and tried to say weather like a man who had slept through it. The judge's pen stopped again, not at the words but at the places where they hit the ledger and bounced off. Howell spoke finally, last, because men like him go last to make their lies echo sound like the truth's last word. He used contract like a cudgel and civilization like a shield and savage like a match. Each time, someone in the crowd flinched without moving. Then Hasty and Nez spoke. He did not say many words. He said goats that walked into a book as gifts and walked out as debts. He said daughters who do not steal. He said if you want to make a law, make it next to water in winter and see if it lives. The judge put his pen down at the end of that and did not pick it up for a long time. When it was done, the judge did not make a speech. He was the kind of man who hides his best choices under small gestures. He wrote a line on a paper and handed it to Pike. Seize whatever property belongs to Mr. Howell that was gained by fraud, he said. Return what was taken to those it was taken from. If Mr. Howell believes he is owed anything more than his pride, he can appeal to a higher court or to his pastor. He looked at Elijah. Mr. Cutter, you will find that books burn slower than paper when you fill them with apology. Pike nodded. He did not smile. He put the paper in his pocket as if it were a seed. It will grow, he said. Howell laughed as if someone had told him a joke from a county he did not know. You'll be gone in a year, he said to the judge. And I'll still be here. You might be, the judge said mildly. Your name won't be. Afterward, the crowd did the thing crowds do when a heat has passed. They stood around and pretended to make other plans. They shook hands with people whose hands they would not have shaken last week. They bought licorice at the post because it is a thing that makes mouths busy until brains decide who won. On the way home, Sorrel let Windfall carry her a half-mile while Caleb dozed in the wagon shadow. She could not remember when she had last let an animal carry her without making her think that riding was a list of chores. Windfall's back felt like the friend kind of height. The fields along the road had that pleased dark look dirt gets when someone has stirred it with a rake and then left it alone. The sky turned the color of an apricot you can smell across the kitchen. Sorrel's body unclenched notch by notch as if someone had been pulling pegs out of her muscles and telling them they were free. They crested the low slope above her yard and saw dust, but not the trouble kind. The friendly kind, children playing tag around a barrel, a man riding a swayback mule toward work he was not eager to start and would do well anyway, a hawk finding a thermal and being sensible about it. Sorrel let the breath she had been hoarding all day go where breath goes when you stop guarding it. At the gate, she slid down and opened the latch and felt one of those small, ridiculous stabs of pride you feel when a gate you fixed yesterday works today. Caleb made a contented noise with no word in it and drove through. Windfall followed. The well rope creaked in its old way as if to say, "Come on then, let's do today again." Days settled. They did not settle like feathers on a pillow. They settled like stones put back where they hold a bank from falling. Windfall learned the fence line as if she had drawn it herself and pointed with her ears at places where coyotes had been clever. Caleb learned that posts listen if you talk to them and lie if you shout. Pike came twice with papers that made sense and once with one that did not. Sorrel sent him back with a sentence and a biscuit, and he returned a day later with a different paper and the same biscuit, untouched, because men like him cannot accept food when they are ashamed. Dolly and Najoni came when they could, and Azze Najoni came when she chose, and Hasty and Nez came once, slow and quiet, and stood where the blue cornmeal had been and smiled in that way that means a man has seen a piece of the world he can live with. It would have been a tidy ending if endings were tidy. But the world is not a ledger that you can close with both columns balancing and the judge's blue arc at the bottom. On a late afternoon thick with the smell of rain that had not arrived yet, Caleb rode in from the north fence with his mouth a tight line and his horse breathing like it had been told to be brave. "Riders," he said, and the word did not pan out immediately to trouble because riders were always coming. "It is what they do." He added the pinch of salt that tells you whether you will like the stew. "Army." Sorrel did not feel her heart drop. She felt it put its boots on and stand up. "How many?" "Not a troop," he said. "Half. A lieutenant who looks new and a sergeant who looks like he was born old." "Wagons." "2 men with a crate marked with the little skull someone in a city thinks means boom." She did not need the skull to understand the mood behind it. "How far?" "Hour," Caleb said. "Maybe less if they take the arroyo you taught us to cut across." Sorrel's first thought was the hair on the shelf. Her second was the ring in the yard. Her third was the cornmeal in the pouch that smelled like morning. She stood, and the standing felt like the first time you step into a river in spring and tell your legs, "Be brave." "Water the stock," she said. "Windfall and Comet first." She smiled when she said Comet's name and the smile hurt her in a way she liked. "Then bring out the table." "The table," Caleb said, as if she had said cannon. "The table," Sorrel repeated. "And the cups." "And the coffee." "And my mother's Bible." She found herself smiling again, different this time. "If the army is coming to bring paper, we will teach it where paper sits when the wind is up." They came in order, the way men who live by orders do. The lieutenant was as young as Caleb had said and as careful with his posture as a boy at a funeral. The sergeant was as old as dust and twice as competent. The wagons creaked like men clearing their throats. The crate with the skull sat in the second wagon as if it were embarrassed to be included. "Miss March," the lieutenant said, and his voice wanted to be kind and did not know how to be tired at the same time. "We are here with a writ concerning your land." He looked past her shoulder into the yard, where Caleb had set the table under the even Windfall had put her chin on the table as if to teach everyone what hospitality looked like. "And other matters." "Paper?" Sorrel asked, polite as rain. "We have seats." She gestured at the chairs. "You can read sitting down. It keeps men from mistaking their legs for their backs." The sergeant's mouth twitched. The lieutenant looked like a boy being told to laugh by someone he respects. He sat. The sergeant remained standing behind his chair like a post that had decided to see what chairs were about. The writ said, "Boundary survey, irregularities, reconsiderations at the request of Bracken Howell, citizen." It said, "Reallocation of water rights in the interest of the territory." It said, failure to comply may result in seizure of assets until such time as the court. Sorrel set her mother's Bible beside the writ like a door left open. My father measured this place with a rope in a sense that the land wasn't his, she said. He taught me to put gates where cattle wanted them and posts where wind told me they should go. He is not here to explain that to you without swearing. I can do it without the swearing, but not without the wind. She handed the lieutenant a cup of coffee and let him feel the steady weight of it. You are welcome in my yard. If you would like my land, you will have to speak to Hasty and Nez. He is my neighbor. The water listens to him when it remembers his name. The sergeant's eyes flicked. He knew the name. Men who survive long past their luck always do. We will need to see the lines, he said. Where you say they are and where the writ says they might be. We will walk, Sorrel said. And we will bring the man who reads shadows better than paper. She whistled once, a note Windfall already understood as carry yourself as if this matters. Caleb, go. Caleb went like a thread pulled through cloth, quick and neat. He returned faster than a man ought, with Hasty and Nez beside him and Nazay like a thought at his shoulder. The lieutenant's eyebrows went up in the way white boys' eyebrows go up when they have been told the day will be simple and then find it is not. The sergeant did not move. His mouth might have wanted to smile again, but it was busy not getting in the way. They walked. They walked to the south fence in the place where the basalt spill made a shadow that small boys had used to play murder without telling their mothers. They walked to the wash in the black line where fire had eaten and stopped. They walked to the cottonwood stump and the bullets wound and the faint dust where blue had been. Windfall followed with her head low and her ears like two good readers. Hasty and Nez spoke when it mattered and not otherwise. Here, he said at the wash, and scuffed his boot where an old line of stones made a straight run too straight to be an accident. Here, he said at the south fence, and tapped a post with 2 fingers and made it reply with a sound only men who listen for trees' answers can hear. Here, he said at the stump, and did not explain because some places explain themselves. The sergeant nodded, once at each here, a short motion heavy as a stamp. The lieutenant asked 2 questions that were good questions and one that was not and learned. He learned where the ground said yes and where it said you're mistaken, boy. He learned that water makes its own law and asks you to follow it or get dry and mean. At the end, he folded the writ along its first crease again and again until it would have fit in a small pocket if he had wanted to put it there. He did not. He handed it to the sergeant, who put it under his arm as if it were a package he would deliver to whoever had ordered it with a note that said, "Wrong house." "We will report," the lieutenant said. "We will recommend a survey that includes men who can read land." He blushed, the way rain blushed across the far mesa. "And women," he said, hurried and sincere. "You will drink," Sorrel said, and did not ask it as a favor. She poured and they drank and it settled the coffee and the day both. The sergeant set his cup on the table and cleared his throat. "Miss March," he said, and the name came out like ma'am when it is said by a man who knows what it is for. "You'll have trouble again. Maybe sooner than you want. Men who lose paper don't forget. They find new paper." "I know," Sorrel said. "I've bought more kindling than I ever needed." She looked at the cottonwood stump and then at the place where the blue cornmeal had marked the world and then at Windfall's mane where the light had made a ribbon. "When it comes, I will meet it on my feet." The sergeant touched the brim of his hat and did not say good luck because he was not a man who believed luck did much that practice and stubbornness could do better. They went, the wagons creaked, the crate with the skull shook its head as if embarrassed to be painted by someone else's fear, the dust lifted and laid itself back down without asking permission. At dusk, Sorrel stood at the threshold where her porch met yard and the yard met the day. She held the pouch as Najoni had given her and pinched a small measure of pollen between finger and thumb. She raised her hand to the 4 small corners the world owns and gave each a breath and a thanks, to the east for the way mornings begin whether you feel like beginning or not, to the south for heat that makes beans tender and tempers iron, to the west for the way light leaves and teaches you to wait, to the north for the wind that tells you what you didn't want to know and love anyway. She touched the last of the pollen to the bullet scar in the cottonwood stump and to Windfall's forelock and to her own lips. Gratitude makes a mouth a better tool. Tomorrow, she told the stump and the horse in the air, I fixed the fence at the lower draw and patched the ditch where the muskrat got bold. Caleb will set the corner post again, but this time he'll listen to it first. Dolly and Najoni will come if the trader's boy minds his new job of carrying water instead of paper. Hasty and Nez will send a man to tell me which goats got loose and which stories need hearing. Pike will pretend to be a man who never laughed here, and the judge will pretend to be a man who always knew better. And I will keep my hands open as long as the day lets me. Windfall nudged her chest as if to say, that is a good plan unless it changes. Sorrel laughed and leaned into the nudge. Unless it changes, she agreed. She slept that night with her window open and her rifle cleaned and the Bible on the table and the folio wrapped in a towel because sometimes mercy is keeping wicked things from touching other things until they turn useful. The rain came at last not as a promise but as a fact. It drummed on the porch roof and made the well rope sing and turned the black along the wash to a soft sheen. The windmill ticked and then stopped and then ticked again, thinking, deciding, going on. Toward midnight, when even coyotes love their den more than their voices, Windfall shifted in the small corral and snorted. Sorrel woke because horses and women and some men are joined by a wire you can't see. She went to the window and listened. The rain softened. The night lifted its hat and showed her a strip of stars. From the east lane, booed steps. Not careful, not cruel. Tired, honest. Sorrel lifted the rifle and did not point it because rifles feel gratitude when you treat them like the last choice. The boot steps came into the yard and stopped where the blue cornmeal had made its last argument. A knock, gentle. She opened the door and found, in the dim and the wet, the trader's boy. He looked smaller because men do when their tasks are decent instead of dangerous. He held a bundle, both hands, as if he were offering a child to be blessed and not a thing to be paid for. Miss March, he said. Pike told me to bring this to you because you held it when it was burning. He said if anyone gets to keep the edges that didn't burn, it's you. He held the bundle out. Inside lay the folio, stripped of its worst pages, still smelling of smoke and the fat of many hands. Alongside it lay another thing, the judge's pen, cracked at the nib where it had been pushed too hard into truth. Sorrel took the pen and the folio and felt a tremor in her hands she had refused all day. Thank you, she said. For bringing it right. For bringing it at night when men who like paper sleep. He ducked his head, water dripping off the brim of a hat someone had given him because boys should not go into rain bareheaded, and turned to go. Wait, Sorrel said. She went to the shelf and took the hair. She put it, wrapped, in his hands. Hold this for me. Keep it by your fire. Don't let men who love paper touch it. When the girls come for it, or when I do, give it back. Until then, let it teach your house to say the truth to itself. He stared at the bundle as if she had taught him to juggle and then handed him all the balls. He nodded. Yes, ma'am, he said, and then, thank you for not making me the kind of man Mr. Howell wanted me to be. You made yourself, Sorrel said. We just set a table. He went. The rain began again, softer. Sorrel stood and listened to it until she knew it was not going to stop just because she would like to sleep. She set the folio back on the shelf, on the other side of the salt, far from the hair, because some things should not be neighbors. Morning would come. Trouble would come again, smaller or larger or sideways. Men would come with paper. Men would come with iron. Women would come with water and bread and hair wrapped in doeskin and stories when the interest was due. Horses would come and go. Wind would keep saying its piece whether anyone wrote it down or not. Sorrel stood in her doorway and watched the rain level the yard until it looked like a page before the first word. She felt the wire between herself and the horse and the stump and the women who had stood with her and the men who had learned to stand without jumping to shoot. She thought of how a yard becomes a church when you let it, and a church becomes a courthouse when you have to, and a courthouse becomes a kitchen when somebody puts coffee on and a woman with burned hands tells everybody to sit down and say what they mean without lying. She smiled, tired and satisfied and ready. She stepped back into the house to bank the fire and put the cups upside down and hang the damp towel near the stove. Windfall blew softly and shook rain from her mane. The windmill turned, slow as a good idea. At the very edge of hearing, behind the rain and the rope, beyond the rise where the road goes toward the post and then turns toward the far towns where paper is born, something moved, a low, steady thrum. Not hooves. Not thunder. A new thing that made the night lean forward, curious. Sorrel cocked her head and listened. The sound came again, different, as if the world were adding a syllable to its old vocabulary in the middle of a sentence. Her mouth open on a question she did not know yet how to ask. Windfall lifted her head, ears pricked, and stared toward the dark of the east lane. The rain paused, polite, to let the sound be heard. And out of the dark slid a thin beam of pale, unnatural light. Not lightning, not lantern. Something else. Writing itself along the wet road like a new line being drawn where the old lines had thought themselves safe. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.